there, CNCers! Scott here again for CNC Labs. We are on video 4 in the nameless guitar series. This one is going to be all about creating your fretboard. So if you followed along so far, we've had, our OnShape tutorial with Tweaky. Part 2 was body, part 3 was neck. This is now part 4. I have now, this is I think attempt 4, ironically enough, to get this video correct. The vibe just wasn't there with yesterday's attempt. So I started over again, and I kind of realized part of the reason the vibe wasn't there was I was involving some steps that just, quite honestly, after I started going through it and like teaching and recording, it wasn't there. It didn't make sense. So I've snipped all that whole part out, and I'm hopefully have simplified this a little bit. Now, as usual, I talk too much. I'm aware of this. It's a sickness, and I apologize in advance. Part of the reason I talk too much is because I just talk too much, and the other part of the reason I talk too much is because in my head, and again, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on this one, I've gone through this process. I've done a whole bunch of them, and in my opinion, part of the reason we do these videos is so that you guys don't have to have the same struggles, or so at least I can point out some, hitches in the giddy up before you get too deep, and I'm saving you a little bit of legwork, a little bit of aggravation. So that's kind of the reason I talk a little bit more than I probably should, because I'm trying to give you information so that you can make more informed choices. So having said that, on my list, and I'm going to refer to this quite heavily today probably, I'm going to throw a whole bunch of stuff in the description as far as parts, bits, things like that, so that you can read through there and kind of get a feel for what's going on. I'm going to try really hard not to bounce around. I can't promise it's not going to happen though. So the first one that we're going to go through is there are 4-bit changes in my tutorial on a fretboard. Let's see if we can get the light to shine brightly. Can we see what's going on here? Yeah. The marker dots are pretty nice. The fret slots are cut in. This has not been sanded, but this is some sick looking ebony that I'm thrilled with how this turned out. So yes, 4-bit changes. We'll get into that in Vcarve. I learned my lesson, finally, for doing these, and I had, well, I mean, this one's glued to a neck now because that was an experiment, but here's another one, another fretboard that has been carved and doing all the things. But I was smart enough to finally learn my lesson, and I cut these down to the size of the original stock of the ebony. So I learned from my own mistakes and my own tutorials, yay for me. It did make life a lot easier. When we hop into Vcarve, I wasn't having to change my document settings, my document setup every single time. I made one bigger, one smaller, one thicker, one thinner. I didn't have to do any of that. So that process was actually way faster and way better. So hopefully you guys can take advantage of that one too. This one, again, I thought it was going to be a really kind of like quick tutorial. The carve part of this is really quick, but how I got there was not so quick, and I kind of forgot about that. So similarly to having my tester pieces cut down to their same size as my actual stock, have your parts on hand first. And here comes a recommendation, because I did and I didn't. We had some frets on hand, but before I kind of had thought about it, they were the wrong radius. And I don't know how much everybody knows about fretboards, but they're not, this one's dark, you can't see it. There we go, there's a light one. They're not flat. Here, I'm gonna try and put it against a dark something. You can see there is a, I'm gonna call it a cup, but there is a radius to this fretboard. I'm exaggerating with my hand, but it's like that. The reason I'm talking about this is because the frets that we had originally were a 7 1/4 inch radius. And in my infinite wisdom, I wasn't paying attention, and I made my radius a 9 1/2 inch. No, I made it a 10-inch radius, if I'm being totally honest. So my frets weren't gonna fit, right? And now we're talking small amounts, but when you're talking about something that you want to stay glued in place and not come popping up after, 6 months or a year, it's gonna make a difference. So think about, if you don't know about fretboard radius, hit up the Googles, do a little bit of research. Again, the vintage ones and the vintage remakes are about 7 1/4-ish for Fenders. I don't know what Gibsons are. I don't know what Paul Reed Smiths are. I don't know what any of the other ones are. I've been focusing on Fenders. I went with, and again, the reason I went with a 10 was because it seemed like the middle of the road. 9.5 to 12 was kind of the middle of the road. I just gotta stop looking at that screen. I'm gonna turn it around. So I made it 10 inch, but then I found that it was actually really hard to find 10 inch pre-radiused frets in the time frame that I needed. So I changed it and went to 9.5. This is where I'm getting to, is when you order your parts, have a think, see what's available before you do it. Now, I now have some 9.5 inch pre-radiused frets. Can you even see these guys? It's gonna buzz in and out. We'll show a close up somewhere else. Either way, we've got 9.5 inch ones of those. This was a bit of a luxury item. You don't need it. You could make your own with a jig and everything else, but for the amount of time it was gonna take me versus the clicky, I took the clicky route, and it's gonna serve two purposes. You can see right there, that one we'll see. It's a 9.5 inch radius. It's gonna mate up very nicely to my fretboard, so when I sand it, it's not gonna change the radius. That's kind of a big deal because you want, your three things to match up. The radius on your fretboard, the radius on your sanding block, or your sanding block, yeah, and your frets. So just think before you do that. Order your parts, because it is going to factor into our next step, which is where I'm going now, and that is, do you want to talk about nuts first, or we'll talk about the radius? Let's go into OnShape first. As you can see here, I took our existing neck, and I just turned off some of the layers. So you can see that I turned off, what did I turn off? Where'd they go? Oh yeah, they're way up here, or they're way down here. I actually started to add on, and I built my fretboard above all of these things, and I just had them suppressed or turned off so we didn't have to worry about them because I didn't need them. These kind of go hand in hand, this OnShape thing and everything else. Let me pull up a picture here. What I'm showing you here in this image is that there are different ways to mount your nut to your neck and your fretboard, which I say neck and fretboard because you can do to either. You can actually cut a slot in your fretboard and have it kind of, mounted in there. The way I chose to do it was to actually have my nut mounted right to my neck. There we go, that's what I'm looking for. So you can see that my nut and my neck are going to be glued together, and that's again what I'm showing you here in this image. And that is what I based my fretboard off of. If you want to go the way where the nut actually slots into the fretboard, you're going to have to go into OnShape and tinker with that. It's fairly straightforward. You just have to, move this edge up to where the nut is and then cut a little slot in for it. There you go. I didn't go that way, so we're not going to show that way. What I am going to show you with OnShape and what I did was, again, there's my nut. I used my digital calipers to measure everything, spec everything. And then I basically just, did a basically, there's another canter, yay. All I did was extrude it, same size as my original fretboard, up. 1/4 inch is what the onlines told me was a typical standard fretboard is at its thickest point, so that's what I did, 1/4 inch. I left some overhang on it. You can see here, this is actually the thicken right there. And if you want to change how much overhang or thickening you do, I believe this is 2 millimeters or 1.5 millimeters. It's something like that. But I left just enough so that when you go to glue your fretboard to your neck, there's a little overhang here. Because, quite honestly, I was not 100% confident that gluing it down, I was going to get it perfectly straight. So I figured if I have a little bit of extra, I can just, use a flush cut router bit, or I can sand it by hand, or with, a spindle sand or something. There was room for error. That's why I left that. So there's a little margin for error built in there, and you can see that with this little overhang. And the only other thing that you'll probably potentially need to play with in OnShape is that radius we talked about. Now, let me stop tinkering around with that. There you go. You can see that radius is there. Now, it doesn't preview very nicely, but it does cut just fine. So you can see that I drew a circle. There it is. And with that sketch, that's a 9.5. So like I said, I changed it back to 9.5 after I couldn't find 10. It was originally 10, then I couldn't find it, and I went, oh, bugger. So for the last one, it's fixed. From there, I used a little tangent constraint. I believe it's that guy. Yep. So you can click on the circle. You can click on that line that you want it to be forced to, and it will force the circle to go to the top of that little rectangular line right there. So that's a good thing. I did that because, I'm not going to change that, then you can do a whole bunch of fancy operations, and basically you extrude this and it'll chop it out of the rectangle to leave you with a really nice looking fretboard with a radius on it. So if you do need to change this because you want to change it, you can just, again, go into your sketch over here, double click on your number, change it to whatever you want to change it to. It would be double what your radius would be. So if you're doing a 10-inch radius, it needs to be 20. You can green check mark. I'm not changing it, so I'm just going to X out. And once you've done that, you would just go down here to your fretboard, and you would right click and you would export and call it whatever you want. STL is what you want because it's going to be a model, and then inches or millimeters, and then you hit export. So that's OnShape in a nutshell. I love how quickly I went through that because, quite honestly, from everything I've watched, videos I've watched, and seeing everything else, I've played guitar since I was, I don't know, 7 or something, and I can't honestly say I've ever really noticed that I can play one guitar better than another guitar, and it was because the radius was a different radius. Now, I'm not a great guitar player. I play for enjoyment. I'm not out gigging or anything else like that, so maybe if I played more, I would notice more, but I don't. So I'm going to assume for the average, Joe Schmo playing in his shop and having a good time, 9.5 is where it's at. So after you've exported from OnShape, we're going to go over here to our modeling tab. And we're going to click on your import your model, and this is fretboard number 2, 3. So you're going to go to wherever you save your file, and my name doesn't matter. There we go. Very clearly, I exported this in a different unit than I am working in here. So we're going to scale it, and we're going to center it. That red board being our material outline, and I guess I should have started with that, but here we are jumping around already. Let's do this. We'll talk about that in just 1 second. So once you're happy with your scale, your center, your orientation hopefully comes in properly, you're going to hit position and import. A couple changes here between the body, the neck stuff, and this is we are not going to create both sides, and we're not going to worry about discarding the data, and we're going to talk about that for right now. The way I chose to do these was to do just a one-sided carve, because when I flatten these all down to the right specs, the bottom side that is going to mate up with my neck, right? My neck has a nice flat face here, and I know that because I've been sanding it flat. And my fretboard, the bottom side of it, is going to mate up to that nicely. So I know those are nice and flat. Why would I carve this? That doesn't make any sense. I'm only going to carve the top. So we don't have to worry about creating both sides because there's no both sides to create. So that's why we're not going to do that. And discarding the data below the zero plane is also not going to matter because we're going to, instead of floating it, so remember that we had the body and the neck and we had it floating in the middle of our material. Can you see what's going on here? There we go. We had it floating. This is going to be justified to the bottom, so the only thing we're going to carve is off the top. So we don't need to discard any data because it's not going to be there. Once we're happy with that, we'll hit import. I should have, I guess, done this in the first place, but I mean, you're going to go into your document settings when you set up your initial file. If it's probably going to be different than mine. I doubt very highly you're going to find the exact same size original stock that I had. So, that's that. I thought that kind of went without saying, but maybe it didn't. You type in your stock size. I could have, and I should have actually, slid this all. I should have made my stock size smaller to not waste so much because I had a little chunk at the top and a little chunk at the bottom, but I wanted to make sure I had lots of grippiness. I used tape and CA glue to hold this thing onto my fretboard or onto my wasteboard. It's fantastic. If you haven't used tape and CA glue, man, super glue, whatever. The accelerant is kind of nice, I'm gonna not lie, and it's like, so I'll show you later, but you put your tape down, you put your glue down, you do the same thing, and then you spray it and you stick it, and I haven't had any issues, even with my super Swiss cheese wonky wasteboard over there, it still holds great. So if you haven't tried it, try it. It's well worth it. I'm using the cheapest of cheap super glues. It's from a certain store that sells things for under a very small amount of money. And actually the tape came from there too, so there you go. Anywho, after you have imported your model, there it is. You can rename it if you want to. Because we only have the one model in there, we don't have to worry about it. This is infinitely easier than the body and the necks because there's no limit planes to worry about and there's no flipping to worry about. So no index holes, none of that malarkey. So it's fantastic. Having said that, I'd still go into my setup. thickness of my material is fine, that's fine, that's fine. These are all things that we just talked about right over here, but again, this is the difference between the body, neck, and the fretboard is originally we had it kind of floating in the middle, and I'm not going to go to the exact middle, but you get the idea that this would have been our body and our neck, and this would have been the extra and the extra. I don't want to do that this time. I'm going to say I want all of the gap to be at the very, very top. So the darker color is the gap, the lighter color is the actual fretboard, and you can see I've got it slammed so that we're only going to carve off the top of it. That's exactly what I was talking about. We'll have a nice flat back, we'll glue it to our neck, and we'll be off and running. I've never had to play with these, and I'm not going to today, so we're going to hit OK. This is just asking me because some material changes, or like the values have changed. Do I want to recalculate? Now, this really doesn't matter. You can say yes, and it'll recalculate, or you can say no. Again, because you have these in your file that we're going to give you, unless you delete them, it's probably going to ask you this. I was thinking about that yesterday when I screwed up the first 3 takes, but either way, I'm not going to recalculate right now. That's fine. Aces. I'm going to split my view because I feel like this is the next step. Is this the next step? Nope, I've already messed it up. That's okay. So we've exported our model from OnShape. We have imported our model into Vcarve. We're not going to worry about this sheet right now. That's just the stuff I have copied over from the original one, so I can kind of make my life a little easier and teach a little bit better. One thing we are going to do before we go into the actual fret slots and stuff like that is we're going to use this create boundary tool again. So we're going to select our model like we just did over here. And we're going to go up here to the create vector boundary. And you can see it's going to draw us a nice vector all the way around our model. That's going to come in super handy for alignment purposes. And we're going to talk about frets and markers now. If you know anything about guitars, you know that they have frets. And frets are kind of important, and their spacing is very important because if their spacing's not correct, then it's not going to sound as good as it should. So I am by no means a fret spacing expert, so I went to the people who are. And I found 2 websites in particular that were super, super helpful. Of course it's not going to load. Yes, I want to continue. StewMax Fret Position Calculator. Very, not basic, but, you know, basic. And very informative, very helpful. So you can change your number of frets, you can change your scale length, and if we haven't talked about scale length, because I don't think we have, it's actually down here at the bottom, it kind of gives us an indication. Your scale length would be, give me the neck. So obviously my nut isn't on here, but it would be from the face of the nut to the bridge saddle where, you know, your strings come through, down there. There's lots of people who can explain it better, so if you need more information about scale length, hit the Googles. I hate to use that as a default, but that's the basic, you know, essence of it. Nut to bridge saddle. That's your scale length. What we've been building all along is a 25.5 inch. So that's in there and that's lovely. And it even gives you some information right here about tellies and strats. From there, you can go your units, what kind of guitar you're using, and then you can hit calculate. Wonderful. Oh, it even says it right there. Look at that. 2 times the length of the 12th fret. Haha, which again is going to come in right there. It'll show you your 12th fret and your length, and somehow, shockingly, mine is actually accurate. Anywho, you could, for all intents and purposes, use StewMax calculator, put in your stats, and then it's giving you all the information you need, you know? So from the nut to the 1st fret, boom. From the nut, you know, the spacing between the frets and the spacing from the nut to the fret. So you could go back into Vcarve and say, hey, I know what my dimensions need to be, and you could just draw some lines where they're supposed to be. You could. You know, you'd have to probably draw some rectangles or some spacers or, you know, have your position something. I didn't go that way, which is why I'm not going to go into detail about it, but you could manually draw these in. In my opinion, that would, not that it would take more time, but it might take more time. And I found another resource that was really, really helpful. It's this website. I'll throw that in the description, obviously, but I call it the FretFind 2D website. And it has more information than StewMax, which is not always a good thing. But the really cool part about it is, you know, you can punch in your units just like everywhere else, but they have all kinds of stuff you can display, which is really nice. So, you know, you can have your fretboard edges. And so that's just showing you your fret slots. You know, you can turn your strings on. You can have your frets extend to the edge of, you know, your thingies, all kinds of stuff. You can punch in your scale length. You can punch in the width of your neck at your nut and at the bridge. You can mess with the spacing, the number of frets, and when you do that, it will automatically populate the chart down here. It's the same information as StuMax, but there's a lot more of it. So that's why StuMax is easier if you're going to go manual. Maybe not easier, but it's just another resource. From here, I got to stop saying too. With FretFind 2D, the part that I found really helpful was you can now download a visual version of what you've punched in. And that's what we're going to use to import into Vcarve. And this is where things went really sideways yesterday, not to take a really nasty detour. I was using Illustrator as an in-between. I thought I needed it. I love Illustrator, so for me it was just a default. But then like when I started recording yesterday, I'm like, I don't need Illustrator. Why am I making this more complex? Like, I mean, I tend to make everything more complex just because, but for this one, so I kind of scrapped yesterday and restarted today. You can choose what format to download in. I feel like I did have originally a note in my notes saying that SVG, you have to watch the scale of it because I feel like I ran into an issue there. So, I mean, DXF should be as accurate as you can get. So if you download a DXF, there we go. I've probably already got saved on my desktop, which is why it's telling me that. But there you go. We're going to take this. Now, the only word of caution I will give you is I would have show fretboard edges turned on. Now, the reason I say that is because when you go back into Vcarve, it's nice to have something to line up to and to align to. That's why I'm using that. Again, you can show strings, you don't need to. And all the other ones, it's tinker, play. But these are the settings that were, in my opinion, the most effective at getting you what you need. Something super cool. And perhaps, again, I'm not sure why I was so excited about it, but you know what I found out, guys? You can actually copy between versions of Vcarve. So if you have two versions open, like I do currently, right? It doesn't matter what I'm copying, but I'll just copy something that I know that what it is. You know, your typical Control C, you go into your other one, boom! You can copy between instances. Not all software will let you do that. So, you know, happy tip for the day. This is what we're going to end up with as far as toolpaths in order to cut everything out. You know, we've got our marker dots, we've got our fret slots, we've got a profile to cut out, and then obviously the 3D model is going to be carved out like the body and the neck. So I think I have these in here just so I don't have to draw things from scratch in case I don't want to, but let's just run through the process. You've exported from FretFind, whatever you're doing. So obviously your scale length might be, if you really change stuff, it's going to be different. You know, it shouldn't, these are what worked for me because this is what we're going to give you. So if you use our stock stuff, this is good to go. If you want to change it for whatever reason, change it to your heart's content. You have saved your DXF. You are now back over in Vcarve, and we are going to go to the import vectors. And I'm just going to go to my desktop, even though I don't want to. And it was the number 1, so we're going to hit open. It's the wrong scale. This didn't happen when I was testing this yesterday. I knew it was going too smooth. Okie doke. We're going to import it. Oh, sorry, that's this little guy here. And then we're going to, well, obviously it's upside down. The scale is correct. If it comes in super tiny or super giant, you know that you weren't working in the same unit, so change your units if you need to. I am going to group this. I am going to double click it and rotate it 180. It is constrained by holding Alt, and that's wonderful. We're going to move it over here. Actually, we're going to move it like down there because that's kind of where it's going to be. We're going to ungroup it so I don't forget to do some things, and I'm going to show you why we're going to join our toolpaths right now. When it imports the file, I believe it's because the strings in FretFind 2D create little segments. We would want to obviously create a toolpath from this, and little segments suck, so we are just going to join everything up together by selecting, joining open vectors. You can see there's a whole bunch of them open. After we join it, there's a whole bunch of them that are now not, right? There's still some open, that makes sense, but there's not 140. I'm going to regroup this, and then I'm going to shift gears for just a moment because I'm going to try and go in order. And I'm going to try and explain better than I just did a minute ago how and why I had order on these. So the marker dots are going to use a 1/16 inch downcut. While not a robust router bit by any means, it can handle, where can we, oh, I need some light. It can handle cutting out these little marker dots fairly easily. we see it better here? You know what? You can see it better on this one. They're not the right size because I changed them, but you can see them there. It can handle carving those out pretty easily. So I did them first because it didn't matter if it started from the top of the original material rectangle and went down a little further because it had enough beef to do what it had to do. So let's talk about marker dots. So I'm going to ignore my toolpath for now. And the way that I drew these guys was you can order material, you know, shell or clay dots, whatever you want to use. If you're going to order your material in, then you would just spec your material and you'd draw it that size, you know, so if it's a circle, you draw your circle and you'd have to find out the middle of the alignment or wherever you want it, because that's very clearly mine's not the same. And you'd have to draw that up and create a toolpath for it. I didn't want to use, I wanted a custom inlay. That was Andy's kind of, not suggestion, but he said, you're not going to do custom? I went, well, now I have to. So I created custom, and I don't think I have the file open, but I actually even mocked it up in Photoshop just to see if I liked the way these looked. And it looked pretty cool. It's not super unique, but it's a little bit different. I am going to actually, when we cut these out, I'm going to fill them with, well, you can see right here. This isn't finished, but you fill it with wood filler, and then you put CA glue on there, and it makes it rock hard. And, you know, so it's almost the same as having a shell inlay. So, decide on your design. If you want to do some big, crazy, funky inlay, you knock yourself out. I was going to, and then I went, no, let's go simple for the first one, Scott, because I haven't done this before. So I just did something really basic. And what I did was I created some rectangles. Ah, my stats aren't in there. Well, that's what that other version of Vcarve is for. So either way, you know what, actually? Yeah, let's go. I'm just going to grab my other ones from Vcarve, because these are actually the ones I drew them from. So I'm going to copy those things, copy, and because it's super cool and I can go into Vcarve, I can just paste them. Paste. Oh, that's the coolest. So I'm not actually going to use their positioning for right now, but you'll see what I'm talking about. So I grabbed the rectangle tool and I figured out what I wanted. There we go. So there's my specs on that guy. Again, this is in inches and I was working in millimeters at that point, so the things are all messed up. Because I'm using a 16th inch, I knew that I had to have a certain amount of radius on this because you're not going to get a square corner out of a round bit. We've gone through that before. So for this part, this is kind of like to your heart's content. Do whatever you want. If you want them to be hearts, make them hearts. If you want them to be dragons, make them dragons. Just realize that you're going to have to create a toolpath for them. So as far as depth goes, because I was packing wood filler in there, I wanted mine to be not super deep, but deep enough that it wasn't just like a little skim coat. So that's about my only advice for the toolpath on that guy. But yeah, you know, I used a rectangle. I radiused the external side of it to give me that round. There's my dimensions. As far as placement goes, I just place them purposefully where they go over the edge of the fretboard so that when it's carving that out and then I trim it all out, it's not like, oh man, I missed a little slice. I wanted them to purposely blow all the way through to go to the top side so that when I'm looking down at my guitar playing, I can see that marker, which again, I gotta stop grabbing that one. And this one's gonna be hard to see it on, but can we focus enough? Focus. It doesn't focus. Yeah, well, maybe I'll show a picture of that, but it does wrap around kind of the top so you can see what's going on. Cool. So you need it on, you know, 3, 5, 7, 9, 12, and then the pattern repeats. So 13, or not 13, sorry, 12, 13, 14, 15, 17, 19, 21. So if you don't know what frets to put markers on, and again, you don't have to follow this convention. This is the cool part about making your own, is you can do whatever you want. I've seen some really cool stuff where people have, you know, done this weird looking scale thing all the way up and all kinds of stuff. So customize to your heart's content. I don't really feel the need to give specifics, but yeah, you know, I drew some spacers so that I could make them all even. And that was what I did. So, you know, I threw a spacer in under here and then I decided how far away I wanted these, and you can put a spacer in or you can just, you know, hit the transform thing. So if this was here, right, you can go over to transform and you can punch in an actual dimension. So, you know, whatever, I honestly have no idea what this is going to be. Quarter inch, way too much. 0.1 inches, sure, boom. So you could move it manually like that. It doesn't matter. This is literally, there's no convention for this. You do whatever you want on this part. This is just what I did. So let's get rid of those because we don't need them now. You know, again, just created my markers. I had spacers that kept it even because I wanted it justified towards the bottom. I did find as I got into the skinnier frets that justification towards this bottom line actually pushed this towards the top line because it got skinnier. So I believe for these 3 and potentially 4, I manually moved them to make it look pretty. This was an aesthetic thing, not a function thing, so I didn't care. There's our markers. So if you go back to, close out of that, if you go back to our fretboard, you know what, I can actually copy these over. Let's do that. So you would create whatever you want to create is where I'm getting to. However you want to create it. Again, you could bring in vectors from Illustrator, Inkscape, or something you find online. Join it all up. There we go. I'm just going to copy these to the fretboard because I actually have a toolpath over here for it. So over here, marker dots, you would select all your stuff. Is it going to let me do it? No. Okay. So you're going to do what I'm going to do. You would select all your dots. You would go to profile. When you click on that, you would get this. Again, I'm going to select mine because it loses that selection, which is cool. Again, I was flip-flopping back and forth, so this is not, I would never put in 0.187 millimeter inches unless I like had a reason. This was something nice in millimeters. We can get back to there, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter? Sure. Let's change it so everybody knows what's going on. No, I don't want to recalculate. What is happening? Why are you still showing me inches? That's really weird. Why didn't that change to millimeters? Oh, because I didn't hit oh, I wonder if I have to recalculate and it'll do it. Let's find out. I'm not gonna, I'm testing something here. Let me test something. Because it's still showing up in inches and I want it to be in millimeters. So sure, I've calculated. Now what happens? Does it actually give me, oh. Aw, man. 0.187, I don't remember doing that. Never gets easy. Okay, so like I said, the depth doesn't actually matter. I mean, obviously you don't want to go all the way through. Maybe it was 0.187. I'm going to measure right now just because I'm super curious. The tricky part. Millimeters. It might actually be that depth. I don't remember doing that depth, but come on. 1.8 millimeters. So I don't know what that's doing. So you know what? Let's punch in 1.8. Just so that we have something that makes sense. So we're going to say 1.8 millimeters. Again, we're using a 1/16 inch downcut on these. You could use an upcut. I don't think it honestly really matters. My downcut, it was clean, man. Like in this ebony, edges are sharp. It's not displacing that much material, and I'm taking very small passes, 1/16 at a time, so there's enough room for it to blow out. I went pretty slow. Again, it was hardwood. I didn't want to rush through it, so I'll throw my feeds and my speeds in the description, or you can really quickly copy them here, but the important part is it's a 1/16 inch downcut. I took a 1/16 inch off with each one. Step over didn't matter because it's not moving over. And there we go. Cool. We are going to go inside because we want to carve out the inside of these guys. We do not need tabs. I have my ramps on. Yeah, see, this is supposed to be inches. Man, what is going on? Either way, I use a 1/2 inch for this, so whatever that is. What is that? 2.54 centimeters. So it's 1.25 centimeters. So it'll be 12.5 millimeters. Aha! I did some math. And then, again, I gave it my naming convention. I wanted to go first. So it's first, and I name what it is and the bit I'm using, and then I hit calculate. And if we go over here, I actually like turning these off again so you can see what it's actually doing. There we go. Marker dots. Super exciting. You can tinker with the depth. You can tinker with the shape. You can tinker with the location. As long, I mean, you don't even have to have them, quite honestly. If you want like a really sleek looking stealth neck with nothing crazy on it, don't put them on. It might make it a little trickier to play if you're not used to playing, but if you're like Pro Star, get rid of them. I just noticed that my camera is tilted down. I don't know how that happened. Let's fix that a little bit. Just a little wee bit, because I didn't realize this whole time my top of my head was getting cut off. Well, that's too much. Man, it's Friday. It feels like a Monday, though. Tilt you down. Louie might cut this out, or he might leave it, and you guys get a close-up of my grill. Whatever you got to do. There we go. That's a little nicer. Marker dots. Complete. Next in line is, again, the 2D finish toolpath. Because, am I in inches? 8.5 millimeters, I'm not. It doesn't matter. Because the original fretboard was not much bigger than the finished product. Again, I think I had 2 mil. So this is it was 8.5 and now it's 6.5. I didn't feel the need to do a roughing pass, nor should probably you. So you would just select your model and you would go to the Finish 3D toolpath, the sphere, half sphere, hemisphere. You'd click on that and you would get this guy again. For this, I used a 1/4 inch ball nose. You could use an 1/8 and just run it faster and it would take about the same amount of time. Probably give you the same finish, but 1/4 inch served the purpose on mine. It came out pretty beautiful. And again, with this radius block, this guy, if there is a little bit of a discrepancy or something, you're gonna sand that down anyways. So this is gonna help you take care of that. If you don't have the radius block, you don't have to worry. Just try and sand evenly. I mean, you're obviously not gonna use a flat sanding block. Maybe use your hand. Just keep in mind that you have a radius on there and you wanna keep that as close to true as you can. 1/4 inch ball nose. Here are my speeds and feeds. I went 6% on this. I do not remember doing that, but it turned out pretty nice. So, I mean, we've talked about this before, that the smaller the step over, the longer it kind of takes. But because we were taking off such a small amount with such a big bit, that's probably why I did that. 80 is absolutely ridiculously conservative for a 1/4 inch bit. I don't even remember what I did, but I probably bumped that up in G-Sender. Let's call it 100 because I think that's kind of silly. And even 100's conservative. You can probably bump that up to 140, 150 without any real issues, especially with a 1/4 incher. Because we only have one thing in here, it's not going to give us, so this is what I was talking about. This is infinitely easier than the body and the neck because there's no extras to play with. So it's defaulting to level 1, which is our fretboard. Machine offset boundary. We played with this a lot more with the body and the neck to kind of deal with that henpecking stuff, but because this is not an issue, I have 1.143 millimeters, and I'm being totally honest, I have no idea why I put that number in there. Again, it was probably something in inches before, and now it's changed to metric. But make sure that when we preview this next, what I want to make sure is in the, so my original material is this wide. I want to make sure that it does actually create a little bit of depth and a channel all the way around. And the reason that's important is, again, because when we go to do these fret slots, I'm not going to run it from the outside edge of the board to the outside edge of the board. I'm going to run it from inside that little trough that it creates around there so that we don't have to worry about snapping the bit, but we still get the depth that we need. It's going to make sense when we preview it, maybe. Strategy, haven't changed. I said in the last video that I didn't tinker with them and play with them, but I actually did at one point to see what it did with the roughing pass, and it didn't make a difference. So I lied in the last video, I'm sorry. Number 2 in the order, 1/4 inch ball nose, calculate. It's going to take a little bit of time, not too much. You can see there's my blue, maze of lines. We're going to turn it off, and you're going to see what I'm talking about with, wait till it's done. Yeah. So here's what I'm talking about, that little trough. And it is, again, fairly little, but you can see there it is, definitively an offset of our bit. And we're going to run our fret slots within this trough to this side of the trough. We're not going to go from out here through this part of the board, through this part of the board to out here, because it will snap your bit. Down here where it's just a little bit, it doesn't. But as soon as it hit the second one up, it snapped it, and I went, I thought it was going to happen, but there's ways to work around that, but I found the smartest workaround was just work within the trough. You don't have to worry about it. It never goes that deep anyways. Aces, I'm excited. This is much better than yesterday's attempt. Fret slots, number 3 in the list. Again, you could drop the marker dots down here if you want to, but because it's a bit change and it's not the same, to your heart's content, my advice would be have your finished toolpath done before your fret slots for the reasons I just explained. Cool. So we're going to grab, this is all the stuff that we had in from FretFind, right? I apparently did not group it, but the good news is it's way over there, so I can group it. So let's go over to our drawing tab, and we're going to group this. And then we want to align it to the vector. So we go to our align tool. This guy, I used it pretty extensively with the marker dots, you know, to align to stuff. I guess maybe that's why I had the fret slots done before I did the marker dots in my last attempt at this, but anyway. Let's go into align, and you're going to grab your fret find and your marker, or sorry, your outline vector boundary, and you are going to, I believe, hit this guy, and that's going to put it the same height, and then we want to center it on that. Fantastic. And you can see that while that original one is not perfect, who knows? Maybe when I put it all together, I'm going to find out that that millimeter did make a difference. I don't believe I moved it because there is discrepancies between the way it imports and all the things. I just left it stock. Next, with the fret slots, you can see as we get further down here, I must have messed up my fret find width at the bridge. Yeah, because mine's more than 2 1/8, and this was 2 1/8. Either way, it doesn't really matter, and the reason it doesn't matter is this is what I was talking about, those fret slots. I'm going to stretch them just past so we don't have to worry about it. So if you just double click on what you have selected, again, remembering that this outline that goes all the way around the top and the bottom, it doesn't matter. It was there for placement purposes. So we're going to just stretch these out just a little wee bit past. There we go. We're just past the outside on that side. We're just past the outside on this side. And again, so that trough is going to cut all the way around like this, and these are going to start just outside of that. So I mean, you can go a little bit further if you want to. Just don't go too far out into this meat because that's where it's going to snap your bit. I guess we should make sure they're down there. Let's move it over a little bit more. Again, you can manually tweak these after because they are just vectors. There we go. So we're outside all the way around. Should be good to go. I'm going to now ungroup this, and I'm going to get rid of this outline because we just don't need it, right? That was there to kind of help make sure this placed properly, because if, hold on, I'll show you. What is that doing? Get out of here. I'm just going to try and explain why. There we go. So if we wouldn't have had this line when we brought it in, and this outline, this would have tried to align to that. And thus our frets would be in the wrong location. So that's why I said have that in there. We're going to fast forward to me deleting this because we do not need it anymore. Our fret slots are going past the outside. And I believe, yes. Why is that guy there? Well, here's the deal. My guitar upstairs is a 22 fretboard. When you do that, you end up with 22 frets. The problem with this is it actually creates a fret slot here, and this would make it 23 frets. So my one upstairs, I went and looked. You need it to have this spacing, but you don't need that last one, right? So this is your 22nd fret, and again, my Fender upstairs has it's a wider one. If I'm being honest, I've played guitar a lot of my life, and even though I'm not a great guitar player, I've never really needed that fret very heavily, so I'm okay with what's happening. If you want to put it in there and do your thing, then go ahead, but it's not going to make any sense. You'll see after we, preview. So our fret slots are going to be selecting our fret slots, as ironic as that is. So is there a quick way to do this? Man, maybe this is why I had them grouped. Either way, we go and we make a couple of clicks, not including the model. Click, click, click. Click, click, click. I'm sure Louie's going to find something fun to do with me saying click, click, click over and over. There we go. And then you would go, oh, that was such a waste. I'm going to group that to make my life easier. You don't have to group it, but you guys would select your frets. You can group it because, again, sake of selection easiness, you go to your profile and you would end up with something that looks like this. And I did do this in millimeters, so this is actually easier for me. So I'm going to grab mine just to make sure we're good. My start depth happened because, like I said, this thing is supposed to be a quarter inch at the thickest spot, which would be basically here on my fretboard, right? Why didn't that? No. Hold on. I can't show you guys that. That's not right. Something happened there where that didn't go where it was supposed to. So I'm just going to reset that. If you do happen to go in and you're noticing that things aren't where they're supposed to be, you can check this guy out. It's not going to hurt it to move it. It's probably going to ask you to recalculate. At this point, I am going to say yes, just because I want it to reset properly. Thank you, I'm happy they did. And we're just gonna turn all this off. And the reason I did that was because I could see that that wasn't carving properly. So let's go back to my preview. Everything's still good. My fret slots was what I was working on. So let's, oh, why did I lose the selection? Because I didn't calculate. That's okay. You've got your fret slots selected. You've gone to profile. Your start depth, again, I hovered over here and did the math. That's all I did. So my piece was 8.5 mil to start. And I need it to be down to, again, this is, I'm sorry. It had to be down to 6.5. So that's where my number came up for my start depth. According to the online research and all the other things that I did, your fret slot is supposed to be the thickness of the tang of your fret wire. I doubt very highly you're going to be able to see. Man, I really got to figure out how to get this thing to focus on what I want it to focus on. You can see, oh, you could see. No? No? Okay, I'm just going to take a picture because that is too finicky for me to deal with. Your cut depth for your fret slots is supposed to be the little pokey downy toothy guy on your frets. Now's as good a time as any to talk about it. I am going to glue my frets in. Again, tons of information out there about the process. I am by no means an expert, and I haven't even finished one. So this is solely based on theory and research and watching other guitar builders that I trust their information. My depth was actually 1.7, but when I did some tests, I found that that 1.7 wasn't quite enough, so I pushed it to 2 millimeters. I mean, we're talking 0.3 millimeters difference, but it seated in there a little bit better, and I felt that that was comfortable. So that's what I did. This is where the beastie little skinny router bit comes in. And I'm going to show you what happened here. So in here, actually it wasn't in here. I had to go into select and I had to create a new bit. Because believe it or not, that's not a standard bit in their library. So you go down to add tool under selected group. I'll delete it later. I'll show you how to do it, right? You can name it what you'd like, right? So type in your tool type, downcut, upcut, corncob, your tool bit diameter, and your units. It tells you what to do right in here. Set default for end mill. Oh, I definitely don't want that. That's not the default bit. So I would uncheck that. And then you'd hit OK. But you have to actually type stuff in here, and I don't want to do that, so I'm not going to. From there, you can hit Create Settings. So you'd actually put in your diameter. You'd create settings, and you would type in all of your information in here. I am not going to lie. I cross-referenced 3 or 4 different online resources to come up with the numbers that I did for my bit. So I'm going to... Actually, I'm going to get rid of this one because this is not right. But that's how you would do it, right? Discard. Yes, I want to get rid of it. Right? So I created a new one. I named it. You can put notes in if you want to, but here's what I ended up... Here's what I ended up inputting for my information. Step over doesn't really matter because it's so skinny. What matters is your feed and your plunge, and this needs to go fairly shallow and fairly slow because, again, it is such a fine bit. 0.01 inches again, so the past depth, the feed rate, and the plunge rate, those are all things I found by cross-referencing 2 or 3 online trusted resources, and I've cut 3 fretboards, 2 softwood, 1 hardwood, and the only bit I broke, sorry, I broke 2 bits. The first one was because I was dumb and I actually moved my hand and I hit it, I snapped it, and the second one was because, like I said, I ran outside of the original material, and I tried to run through it at a 1/4 inch depth, and it said no way, it couldn't handle it. So that's where that trough idea came from. So I haven't broken a bit with these settings, cutting things properly yet. So they should work for you. Great. Cool. So that is my bit. I did on the vectors. This is somewhat out of the ordinary for things that I do, but I want it to be right on these marks because that's where the frets are supposed to go. And we're talking such a tiny, like we're talking like a super 0 decimal point of maybe inaccuracy. And if my guitar doesn't sound good because of that, I'll live with it. No tabs, ramps for sure, 1/2 inch. Number 3, again, as long as this comes after that radius, I think you're good to go. And we're gonna hit calculate. You'll see there's a whole lot of zigzaggies because it's taking off very small amounts each time. I will turn this off and I will let the magic happen. There you go. So you can see from what I've done that it goes into that trough, but it doesn't go past this piece of wood. It cannot handle going through here at a 1/4 inch depth. So that's why I did that. I hope that was clear why I did that. If it's not, let me know in the comments and I will try and make that a little more clear, but I think it was pretty good. Stay inside the trough, folks. And you can even see here that, oh man, that's not right. Because that should, there's the edge of my fretboard, right? That should have some depth to it. And this is where it started. So I'm going to go back to my marker dots. I'm going to make that deeper. Oh, you know what? Yeah, see? That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, that should have been like 4 mil. Calculate. And then let's get rid of this. And you're going to see that this is going to have some depth. That's... Me switching between metric and imperial kind of screwed me on this one. Sorry guys, but that's all that is about. Is it's gonna, you'll see the depth get deeper here because I made that a little bit deeper. Aha! And that's what it's supposed to look like. I apologize, right? Because when this goes to get trimmed out with our next pass, there's still some depth there. And this is deeper and that's fine. It doesn't make any difference. It doesn't need to be radiused with it. That's a 0 factor. Yeah, I'm going to do this next. So the next one is the easiest one of all. We're going to close out of here. And that is our profile cutout, which I again used a 1/4 inch downcut for this. You could use an upcut. You could use a corn cob. 1/4 inch, will a corn cob go through? It's close. I used a downcut and again, it cut flawlessly. It did trim into my wasteboard a little bit. So you either, you know, put something under it or deal with the consequences. You're going to select your vector boundary toolpath that we created over in our menu over here. That's what this guy is. If you haven't made it yet, you would go to your profile toolpath, and when you do that, you would get this. I want it to cut all the way through my material because that's what I want it to do. You could change the start depth if you wanted to, but this is such a small amount of material and like such a short distance, I didn't care. Again, 1/4 inch end mill. It took off 1/8 of an inch at a time because it's that, a hundo. It went through this pretty quick. It handled it no problem. I'm comfortable with that number. Toolpaths, no, or tabs, no. Ramps, yes. And last but not least, because you want that one to cut out last, I think you'll see it when I go to do it, but just make sure when you double-sided tape or whatever you're using, if you're using the CA glue and tape thingy, that you have tape on this surface, you know, because if you've got it just touching the edge and just touching the edge of this, sorry, I gotta stop grabbing that one. Make sure when you are putting your tape on your table that it's touching a good section of this fretboard. If you have it just on the outside edge and just on the outside edge, this might shift a little bit. So if it means an extra strip, use an extra strip. If it needs it, you know, if it means it's offset a little bit in the middle, just make sure that it's held really secure because this cutout is going to cut it right out, and that would really suck to spend all this time doing this and then have it blow up on you. So we're gonna hit calculate, and then we're gonna turn it off just so you can see, and then we're going to show you it getting mowed out. This is exactly how mine carved out. These little flappy guys were there. They did not cause any issue. I scared my dog because I pretended I was a walrus and barked at her. So that is about it, other than to save our toolpaths, which is the same as we always do. We would select it, hit the save, visible. We're not grouping anything together because these are 4 individual bits. You'd want to just, you know, have one more look over to make sure that everything's selected that needs to be selected. It appears to be good. I'm going to hit save. I've already got these saved out in my secret location. And that is here, and we'll either fast forward this or you'll just have to deal with me clicking a whole bunch, but fretboard 2, G-code, and there they are. My order is my order. I ran it in this order and it worked lovely 3 times in a row. If you want to change it, you can change it, but mine worked really well. So you would just do that for each of these, obviously individually, and then you're good to go. That is a millionfold better than what I attempted to do yesterday. I'm quite happy with how that went. I hope everything is fairly clear. This one's a lot more straightforward than the body and the neck. The only other thing I'm going to give a big shout out to, and I don't think I had this in my notes somewhere. I think I was going to do it earlier, and maybe I still will. This is kind of, you know, the computery CNC side of things is kind of my realm of, maybe not expertise, but I have a much broader, happier knowledge than how to actually install frets and fretboards, how to surface them, how to crown them, how to polish them, how to bevel the edges. That is not my wheelhouse. I know my place and I am happy to stick to it. I don't mind, you know, trying new things, but I don't feel like I should be giving you guys every little detail. So I'm going to give you a hint right now. Similarly to, you know, buy your material, have your parts on hand, all that stuff. I want you guys to check out Dan at Guns and Guitars. I'll throw the link down below. He has some absolutely, and I'm going to swear here, he has some absolutely kick-ass videos on how to do what we're going to do after we carve this out.
You're going to end up taking off more from the middle section than from the two ends, and we will fix the back end a little bit later. But if you're going to have any frets that sit a little bit taller than the others, you're going to want those to be the frets up here.
I was going to leave it till later, but I figured in case you were doing this and you were kind of like, oh, well, how's Scott going to do this? This is how Scott's going to do this. I'm still going to show you how to carve it. I'm still going to show you probably some B-roll, some voiceover of how I actually carve this and put it all together. But I don't think I'm going to go as in-depth as I do for this portion of things because I'm not an expert on it. Check out Dan at Guns and Guitars. He's got a long mill. He's having a fun time with it. He is awesome, and his explanations are fantastic. I was able to follow along with them. He gives you lots of tips and hints and tools, which again, I'll have in my description. That's where I got my information from. So I'm going to give him a full-on shout out and say, thanks, Dan, for being an awesome tutorial master on these. So next we're going to get to town. We're going to carve this sucker out. I'll time-lapse it and B-roll it, and I'll give you some information as I go. Check out Dan. He's going to, again, way more thorough, way more in-depth, better explanation, probably a little less hyper. So we're going to run you through the process. I'll come back here and there as we go. And then, is that it? That's it, guys, for this part. So I hope you found it handy. Make sure you're linked and liked and subscribed and all the goodness. If you have comments, keep them nice because we're all here to learn. And yeah, let's get to business. See how I looked at the lens and not you?
I'm saying to look at you, not to look at the lens.
No, I'm looking at the lens because you're always yelling at me to look at you. The router's going to follow that. There's not a single bump in that I'm worried about, so I probably can. Duct tape it on there. Just put something. Help it out. Small eyes, big eyes. Small eyes, big eyes. Big eyes, small eyes. But it's in focus for me. Out of focus. Focus. Out of focus. That is clear. That's getting blurry. That, the number of times I'll be laying in bed and I'll hold it like this and I'll drop it on my face. time I've sanded one of these. Really long story short, when we carved out our fretboard, I purposely made it a little bit wider than the neck. Now, going through the process and figuring things out, my fretboard should be glued to my neck before I install my frets. So I'm stuck at a crossroads of either I shave some of my fretboard down so it's a little bit thinner, closer to the neck right now, or I glue it down and then try and sand it down after. I'm off by about 1 millimeter on each side, kind of left and right, or whatever you're looking at. So instead of trying to glue the neck and then sand, because then I have to worry about scratching the neck and dinging the neck, I'm going to take some of the meat off of this fretboard first. This is a fairly close to known flat surface. There's a little hump back here, which is why I have this piece of tape here. So I know not to work on that side. This side's pretty good. I'm going to do this by not double-sided tape, CA gluing some sandpaper. This is 150 grit, 1 inch wide. So I'm just going to CA glue it to this flat surface, and I'm just going to kind of go back and forth. It gives me a flat surface to keep this as nice as possible. I'm not worried about getting it down to final spec. I'm just worried about getting a little bit closer, so when I do glue it on there, it's more finished sanding and a little less like, taking off a whole bunch. So that's what we're doing now. I've got my tape on the back of here. I'm going to throw some glue down on here. I'm going to use, yeah, there's some in there. Is there some in this one too? I'm going to try and use up the open ones. So, oh yeah, there's some in there. Ooh, that's going to be a lot. So let me spread that out a little bit. That one's now empty. And I'm just going to spread it out because there's way too much on that end. So by spreading that down, there we go. We'll throw it in the crack so we don't get it all over our hands, because I spilled one of these all over my fingers yesterday and it took me a minute to realize it. That was a lot of fun. So this is just going to hold this in place while I gently massage some of the side of this fretboard down. A little accelerator to make life faster. A word of caution: if you're going to use accelerator, don't spray it on the back of the sandpaper itself. It will not stick. However, if you use the tape trick, it should work. So just hold it in place, line it up as best you can, and then stick it down. This is my new favorite trick in the world. It is a little more wasteful, but man, does it work really nicely. I'm not looking to remove, again, down to spec. I'm just looking to get rid of some. And I used 150 because I want to remove it fairly quickly. I could have used another one, 220 or something, but and this doesn't have to be exact. So I'm gonna, oh, you can see right there, right? It's not as flat as I thought it was, or my neck isn't, or my fretboard isn't. So we're just gonna massage it. So when we compare it on here now, because that's ultimately what it matters, is how close we get it to here. Keeping in mind that your nut does need to be on the end here, and that will also need to be shaved down just a little bit because my neck is skinnier than my nut. Again, there's still a fair amount on there, right? Here, I'll see if I can kind of pinch this in place and show you what we're dealing with. All right, so if we zoom, can we zoom in enough on this? You can see that the overlap on there is not a ton. It's about 1 mil. It would be nice if it would just stay focused on what I want it to focus on right there. So just trying to shave that down a little bit. I'm going to keep going. Because this is relatively flat, it would be nice if it was doing it all at once and not leaving me with a bow in the middle. Hello! I'll just keep going back and checking. At the very least, I'm not going to take off too much. I am a little bit nervous that it's not getting any of the middle. So I'll move it over. I could just take it off directly off one side, but I want to make sure that that fret slot that's been cut in is kind of even. Otherwise, I'm going to end up with more on one side than I am on the other. So I'm just going to keep on checking back in because I don't want to take off too much. Center it and feel what's going on. Right now, this is actually a fair amount by feel. I can still feel there's quite a bit on the top end of that, and I don't know how much my sandpaper's running out. So we're going to fire up the dust collector and clean that out. you saw what I did there. I was just working it back and forth. I mean, would it be lovely if this was perfectly flat? Yes. There was clearly a little bow in it, higher on the edges, bow in the middle. When I was running it back and forth, you could see that it was picking up more sandpaper here, or it was picking up more, you know, wood here and missing a little bit there. That's why I was kind of working it over and over, trying to keep it as smooth as possible. Again, comparing it many, many times while I was working to see that everything was going pretty good. I don't know if we're going to be able to pick it up any better this time than we did the first time, but we're going to try. The piece of tape here is just so I could stop trying to have to guess where this was going to rest. It represents the edge of my nut. And if I line this up kind of as best as I can by hand, you'll see that there is just a, you can see there's a fraction of what there was before, comparatively. There we go, it helps out a little bit. All right, so there's still a little tiny lip on here, and I'm doing that on purpose because I still am nervous, if I'm being totally honest. Knowing how accurate this thing is, I probably could have, should have, and I'm probably going to put it in the tutorial for you guys to dial it in a little bit more. I may put a disclaimer in there that says, go as loose or as tight as you want on this thing. For me to hand sand something like this, even if you don't have, you know, a piece of old counter laying around, I'd rather hand sand and massage that into place than rely solely on a machine. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe if I would have just done it with the long mill, it would have saved me a little bit of aggravation. But if it goes south, then you're redoing all of it. So I figured you can always take away, you can't add. There's my theory behind it. So again, the 150's got a fair amount of tooth left on it. I might refine this a little wee bit more, and then my next step is going to be gluing this on here and praying that I get it on there as square as I can. I think the way I did it last time was basically to find the edge of my nut. Actually, here, let's zoom in on this guy because I got it sitting right here. Something I found super handy. Can we see in the camera here? So you can see actually the light does a really great job, and this is what I did. I shined a light on it, and I actually just took a pencil and just ran it along the edge. And as long as your pencil is not going to touch this slopey face and only touches here, you'll get a really nice crisp edge of where your nut needs to line up, the back of it. From there, you can you'll line up your nut on that line. You can draw a pencil line, and then again, you can tape that part of your neck so you can just kind of keep bouncing it into that, so you don't have to worry about having the nut on there. You could tape your nut right on there. The problem with that is if that happens to shift, then you know. So what I think I'm going to do is just continue to shape this just a little wee bit, just to fine tune it a little bit more. Is there still a lip on there? There's still enough of a lip on there. I can take a couple more passes without losing too much sleep. That's getting pretty close. Again, we're talking like half a mil. We're talking a quarter of a mil on each side. Does that even make sense? A quarter of a millimeter? What would that even be? I don't even know what that would be. That's a quarter of a millimeter. Either way, I'm going to shape it, and then we're going to go into gluing, which I'll record that too. So keep watching. Alrighty, we've got our fretboard kind of sized as close as I'm comfortable with to my neck without messing around too much. We're getting into the nitty-gritty here, folks, where worlds start to blur and, you know, things get a little exciting. In order to glue my fretboard to my neck, I need to have my truss rod in that truss rod pocket. I haven't actually drilled out the hole for the truss rod in the headstock yet, so this is still solid right there. It looks like a hole, but there's no hole there, I promise you. It's just shadow. I measured it up, and I found it was about, 4.2 mil up and down, and about the same center to center. So I've marked that with a pencil. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get enough light in there to see what I'm showing you, but there is a pencil mark right in you can't even see what I'm doing. There's a pencil in the middle of that hole. And instead of just going bonanza, I'm going to actually use I'm going to be really gentle on this because this is not a whole lot of wood right there. Right, so I don't want to split this little tiny bridge that's across there. So I'm just going to use a nail to tap I'm not even going to use a hammer, actually. I'm just going to use my hand. And I'm just going to place it on my pencil mark and just kind of wiggle it around. I just want to give the drill bit something to kind of center on. I'm pushing pretty hard. It hurts my finger to do it. It's centered as best I can. I mean, this does not need to be perfection in my opinion, because as long as your Allen key fits into your truss rod, you should be good to go. Speaking of which, I grabbed all of my tools and things and found the Allen key that fits my truss rod. It happens to be this guy here. It happens to be a CNC actually, Allen key. I have a whole box full, but this was the most handy one. So I spec'd that out, and what was it? I can't remember now. It was like 12 seconds ago. It is 3.7 millimeters ish. So I found a drill bit. There it is. That is the same. Actually, it's just a little wee bit bigger. I think this was 3.7, the Allen key was, and the drill bit's like 4.2. So we're talking like, you know, a little wee bit of room. You'll be able to get her in there. So as much as I hate to do this, I don't have any, I mean, I could do it with the drill press, but for what this is, I think I'm just gonna go by hand and be really gentle. Although, now that I'm seeing this, I need a longer drill bit. So I just recorded all that for nothing! Although, I happen to have 2 drill bits right here that are, let's spec them. I think that's going to be way too big. 4.6 is a little big. And I think this 1/8 one is going to be too small. But, let's spec it just to see. 3.30, so either go too big or too small. So I'm going to start with the too small one. So I changed my mind here, folks, on the fly, because I haven't done this yet. I have a 1/8 inch, 12 inch long drill bit. Same process. However, the distance on this guy, my workbench is a mess. This is what happens when Louie's not here to yell at me. So I'm just going to move a couple things around here. So the reason why the longer drill bit is handy is, you know, you don't want to be doing this on an angle to your headstock. If you can go as in as, you know, truss roddy as possible, it makes a lot more sense. So by doing this, I actually have a much nicer way of doing this. So I'm going to go really gentle. I'm going to try and keep that as straight as I can. Taking my time. I'm literally taking my time. This is actually making it kind of painful for me, but having never done this is the first time I've ever done it. Should I do it on the good one or should I get an experimental one? Let's do an experimental one, eh, Scott? Although, I mean, this isn't really rocket science. No! We're going to live on the edge today. It's looking good. I'm going to try and keep that as level as I can. I'm going to put that back in there. I'm going to look at my camera before I go any further so you can see what I'm doing. Can you see what I'm doing? There we go. Which means I need to slide some things around. 'Cause it's way harder to record things when you're by yourself. Like I said, these worlds of fretboards and necks are kind of colliding now. So I'm at a point where everything is out because I'm just constantly going back and forth. So you can see I've got my neck as flat as I can, as parallel as I can to my drill bit and square. And I'm just, you know, taking my time. Again, I could rip right through this because truth be told, I think I'm being a little cautious, but it is my good neck and it is the first time I've ever done this. So I'm just going to be a little hyper cautious. Applying very, very gentle pressure. And there she goes. So, you know, that's all she wrote. And I don't know if we can see it now. Is there a hole in there? Any daylight? No. Well, I promise you there is a little hole in there. It is not as big as my Allen key, which again, I knew that going in with that drill bit. Right, so now we're going to have to figure out how to, you know, some days I just want to do things a little bit that way. I feel like you're way too big. I'm just going to line you up side by side. If I center that on there, it's actually not that, but I'm going for it. You know what, folks? Right tool at the right time? Absolutely. And then there's other times where I go rogue. Can I actually get in there with this guy? Let's find out. It looks like it's going to be on a little wee bit of an angle, but we're going to just go nice and gentle again. You know what? I didn't leave a mark on my neck, on my headstock. I appear to be center. Here's the real test, isn't it? Yeah, it's a little tight, but it does fit in there. So, I mean, at the end of the day, there it is again, the end of the day, but that's what we're looking for, right? As long as that'll fit through there, then you can just, you know, tweaky your truss rod, and we're good to go. So that's how I did that. And I think that is the first thing I've done since I started this whole guitar video where I didn't actually plan it out and spend 4 hours worrying about it. So, yay for me. We are going to insert our truss rod into our truss rod pocket, which, I mean, there's only so many places it can go. Ooh, that feels tight. I may have to expand that a little wee bit because I feel like it's flexing the neck a little bit. I don't like it. So I'm going to grab a little tiny screwdriver to pop this back out and try and be very gentle because, you know, the last thing I need to do is break something right now. So I'm going to actually use the truss rod. Yo, baby! We're going to come down here. We're going to lift it from the back end. Look at that. Okay, so the back end is a little bit looser. So I'm seeing that I'm going to have to adjust my file that I've given you guys because I swear that fit in this one no problem, but maybe pine's a little more forgiving. Let's find out. No, it was tight in there too, and I think I just slammed it in there. So I think I'm just going to take a little bit of sandpaper, open that up a little bit so that I don't have to force it in so much. I have so much sandpaper laying around. Sure. This doesn't require anything fancy. You know what might be even better than sandpaper? Is this little baby file. Look at this guy. Little baby file. And I'm just going to go in and gently open up where this truss rod needs to be. So I'm going to position it back in this neck and see where it's tight. And I'm going to say here and here is where it's going to get a little bit of work. So that's what we're going to do now. Found a little bit bigger one. And I'm just going to gently open this little section up. Again, at this point in the game, I am taking my sweet time. I would much, much, much rather do things a couple of extra times and fit it than to just go crazy and ruin it. So, for all the people out there that are expert guitar builders and they're saying, Scott, you can't do that to your truss rod pocket, I say, truss rod away. In rod we trust. And with any amount of luck, we're still flush under there. That's pretty good. Check that out. Ta-da! Truss rod in. Allen key fits and will do its job. So, that's pretty fun. I just want to make sure that that really is below the surface by just a little wee bit because the last thing I need is some glue spilling in there. I know I'm going to tape it, but truss rod. All right. I guess what's next is me going and grabbing a whole bunch of clamps because we're going to mark. You know what? I can do that before I go and do that. Let's do that. I think I showed you already how I did this trick. We'll see if we get enough light on this to do it. So, because we don't have any sort of slot cut in our neck, or sorry, I guess in our fretboard, where our nut's going to go, I'm just taking a pencil and I'm ever so gently, focus camera. Oh, Louie, you're gonna hate me, but I'm trying really hard, but it's just not working. Why are you not? There we go. So you can see that really hard edge. Well, it's really easy to see when there's light, but as soon as that light goes away because you're monkeying with it, you can't. So I just grab a pencil and I just shade. And you can even see that, look at that, at some point, that's probably a bad sanding job. There's a little blip in my line there. Well, that little blip is probably from me. So the good news is I know it's there. The bad news is it's there. I'm then going to take my nut and I'm going to line it up right on that line. And we're never going to see it again underneath, so I'm not worried about it. And then I'm going to mark it with a pencil. Let's not even talk about the jumpy jumpies. Never going there again. However, okay, there we go. You can see my pencil line. The hard one on the, I don't know if it's going to be left or right, but you can see the hard one closest to the headstock. That's the back end of my nut. And the pencil line inside that is where my nut will be. Awesome. Because I don't want to glue that in first. I mean, I've never built one of these before, so maybe it does make sense to glue the nut on first and have that to line the fretboard up to, but I'm not going that way. I should have done some more research on that part, but we're going to line up to that. And this is where I think I'm actually going to use my tape trick. This worked on my testers, so I just know where my nut's going to line up. And instead of trying to guess afterwards, I'm just going to put a piece of tape right on that line. Is this the right way of doing it? Who knows? But it's the way that worked for me. The reason I'm throwing that tape on there is so that when I go to glue this on, instead of guessing, I can bump it right in there. See? It lines up. It's just a tactile, sorry, there we go. It's just a tactile guide on top of things because it's going to be a little trickier to see pencil on the back of this ebony than it was on the back of the pine one. So I'm going to throw some tape down the middle of this guy. I'm going to grab some clamps. I'm going to mark my centers, which there's not much, and then we're going to go to town. So we got that in place. Grab a strip of painter's tape to go down to, I guess we can just do this, eh? Why does this seem really wide? We're going to center that as close as we can. We're going to drag it down here and do about the same. I can see through my tape. You guys won't be able to see it on the camera because I can tell, but I can see through my tape enough to see where my truss rod is. So it's pretty close to center. I mean, perfection? No. And I wouldn't usually do this, but I'm going to actually cut this piece of tape instead of just tearing it. So I get a nice clean edge. There we go. I do need some glue, and I do need some clamps, so... And I do need to mark the back of this. So let's mark the back of this while I'm standing here. I'm probably going to use millimeters because they just seem like they're easier to divide today, depending on what the size of this is. So let's get an accurate measurement of 43.3. And again, if I'm off by a little bit, okay, so 43.2. So that will give me 43.2. That's going to give me 21 is 42. 21 and a half is going to give me 43. So 21.6. So I have to mark a 0.5 millimeter and like 0.8 millimeters. I think I may just end up eyeballing this because that's just too close to... I don't even think I can mark that, can I? I guess I can use this guy. I've never used this guy to mark something like this. There's 0.8. Want to see what 0.8 looks like? Can you even... There, that's 0.8. Uh-huh. That little... The good news is, it means there's not a lot to play with. The bad news is, it's really hard to mark. I'm going to mark my 0.8 on another side, up here at the top. Again, this is going to be really hard to see on ebony. It's even harder to see when I've got fancy lighting, and I can't see what I'm doing. But, you know, the things we do. So I do have 2 pencil lines on there. I'm going to mark those in the bright light in a minute. And I have to mark 0.45 on the bottom. Come on now. This thing's not even going to register 0.45 of a millimeter. It's trying. 0.4 of a millimeter. That's embarrassing. I think that's getting an eyeball, folks. Because even if I want to, it's literally the width of my pencil tip. So, if I know myself, I'm fairly artsy. I feel like this is going to get an eyeball, not a actual measure. Cool. Time for tape and time for glue. Don't make a mistake because you'll be mad at you. Once you're happy with that, you peel off your truss rod tapey pocket. And I'm going to literally just stick that to my workbench because I don't have time to deal with it. Because now I have to do this. And this part makes me super nervous. Now, I know I have some time. I don't think I'm even going to bother with my pencil lines, quite honestly, because this ebony is hard to see. And while I understand why people are taping this to or gluing this to a bench, I think I'm going to try it the way I did it with my experiment and just do this really gently. One little half squeeze. And then I'm going to come down here and do the same. And again, folks, this is the first time I've done a good fretboard. So if this doesn't turn out, then we're up a creek. It is butted up nicely against my tape, though. It feels centered, which is kind of what I'm going by, because there's just not enough meat to do anything with. Ah! And that's why I don't like this method, because you gotta be a little bit careful. It feels pretty even. Maybe a little heavy there. It's still pushing against my tape, which is good. Again, I'm gonna have to sand this neck down a little bit to finish sand it, so I'm not too worried about that being perfect. And again, we're talking about like a 0.5 millimeter down here. Like, that's barely a lip on either side. And I don't need a ton of pressure on this to make it stay in place. And I fully expect to be polishing or, you know, doing a little more sanding after, so I don't really mind if I'm trying to keep the glue off my hands. I'm trying to see if there's some spill out everywhere, because there should be just a little tiny bit. I'm going to alternate these to try and keep the pressure as even as I can. I've got a couple more in the wings over there, so I may go and grab a couple more just to... Ooh, there's some spill out, so scooch. Oh, I'm getting quite a bit. So maybe I went a little bit heavy on the glue there. I just want to make sure that there's sufficient pressure all the way around this guy, because I'm still going to do some sanding. I don't mind if 2, 4, 5, 6, I should have 2 more of these. Whew, it's making me nervous. I feel pretty comfortable with where it's at. Ooh, I'm spreading glue by accident. I'm not gonna lie. I'm happy and terrified all at the same time, because this will work. So, that was my process. I'm by no means a master neck builder, because this is literally the second one I've glued up. Second one I've glued up. So hopefully, can we see what's going on here? Yeah, there's all kinds of clamps and funness. Hopefully it works. I know there's still some finish sanding to do around the edges, which is what I'm okay with, and I will probably hand bomb that, just because, again, I want to finesse it in there. If I made 10 or 20 necks, I'm probably not going to do it this way. I'm probably going to find a smarter way. I haven't. I've made one. It looks really nice. I hope it plays really nice. I hope that my glue, sets up the way I want it to, and I hope that it all works out. So I'm gonna let this dry for a little while. I'm gonna leave the squeeze out, and I'll sand that off after, so I'm not even gonna mess with that. I don't really know what the next step is. It could be gluing on the nut, it could be doing the frets. Oh, the next step is gonna be sanding, so I 100% apologize. I do know what's next. I'm gonna sand this down. I'm gonna get this heel shape the same as the neck, and then I'll probably end up starting with frets, gluing on the nut, throwing in some tuners, and we're not too far off, so stick around. Woohoo! Those clamps left a little bit of marking on my surface, but I knew I was going to have to sand it down anyway. So yeah, there's a little bit of spill out there. And again, for other people who are, whatever word you want to fill in the blank with, better than me, they may not like that, but I'm okay with it because I knew I was going to sand. There's again that lip, so you're probably not even going to be able to pick it up. If I'm being honest, I'm being fairly picky, but there is a little more of a lip on this side. You can hear my nails going across versus this side. There is a lip. It's just not centered as nicely as I would like, so I'm not getting it as bang on as I'd like, but you know, it is what it is. I can live with it. For my first ever attempt, I'm going to cut myself a little wee bit of slack and say, learning process, good to go. I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to turn off the mic, actually, because I don't like having this thing dangle, and we're going to go to town. Let's start sanding. I lied. I didn't turn my microphone off. So, Louie can use this audio, or I can record some voiceover, but all I'm doing is just taping off the neck a little bit, because I do have to do some, not fairly heavy, but I do have to do some sanding, and why take the chance on scratching up all of this when I could take 2 seconds and 12 cents worth of tape and make sure that I'm not going to touch it. So that's all I'm doing. A little bit of prep, kind of like, you know, when you're painting trim and stuff. You can just give her and get paint everywhere, or you can tape some stuff off and save yourself some cleanup. So that's all I'm trying to do, is save myself some cleanup. I can see that there is indeed the spill out that I'm going to have to deal with. And truth be told, I might even just use a scraper and just see if I can gently go in there. Again, I'm just trying not to create any gouges and scratches. The neck is fairly close to finish sanded. I said in the other video that, you know, with the body I might go up to 600 or 800 on it. I'm probably not going to. I did some experiments, and same as the body and the neck, I want to do like a natural finish on it. I don't want to put a poly or a wipe-on poly or anything like that. I don't really want shine. That is 100% a personal taste thing, so I am going to just rub on. My experiments gave me Ligna as the winner. It's basically, it's a food safe, no VOC, I believe, natural finish, so it felt nice and smooth. It brought out some, I just drew a blank on the word. It makes it gives the wood some extra pop. And again, that was just with experimenting and messing around. So I wasn't too worried about that spill out because I knew I was going to sand. I know that my experiments with it are good, and now I'm just rambling, so I'm going to have to tell Louis to cut this part out. Woo. Alrighty. So, you've watched the time lapse. I got a little bit more work to do here. I still have to shape the bottom of this. I might take that over to my little guy over there. It's a little belt sander. I haven't decided. Either way, I'm going to get the shape of that to match the shape of my heel and my neck. I do not want to mess with the shape of that because I know it fits really nicely in the pocket of the body. So I'm just going to keep tinkering and I'll show you what I get when I'm done. We have our neck all taped up. We're over here at my handy dandy drill press. If you haven't checked out Dan at Guns and Guitars, this is where this all came from. We took a bit of the fretboard radius sanding block. We, knocked an edge off. We put a screw in it, drilled it in, and then knocked the end off, and you end up with a sweet little, drill press call. So you don't have to worry about hammering frets in. You just use this guy. I don't think it's anything necessarily groundbreaking, but if I can do less damage to my frets and still get them installed nice and evenly and keep the same radius as my fretboard, and my fret for that matter, because these are pre-bent wires, then it seems to make sense to me. So I have, my handy dandy super glue packages. I've got some, can we see these little guys? These are little skinny guys. Come on. Yeah. These are just going to go on the end of my super glue once I get them set up. And then I'll be able to just ever so hopefully gently get some super glue down into those fret slots. I'm a little nervous. I mean, I feel like I should have taped them even closer, but there has to be a little bit of overlap for where the fret wire sticks in. So I've got my fret wire sitting over here. I'm going to measure them all out. I've got my handy dandy side cutters. I actually tried. I didn't buy specialty tools for this particular process because I knew I was going to have to sand it down, and I figured these were going to be strong enough. So I actually did a test of, some, what are those? Those are my bullnose, some little baby ones, and then, even I had a pair of flush cuts, those guys. These ones did a decent job, but I found that my side cutters just... Probably because they're a little bit beefier. Maybe if I bought a pair of flush cut that were a little more meaty, I'd get about the same, but I'm not sure the result's going to be that much better. So I've got those. I am just going to go through, because my fret wire is basically not much bigger than my neck, right? My fret, or my fretboard. There's no chance in salvaging, 2 for 1. So I can't get 2 frets out of 1 chunk of wire. So I'm just going to go through. I've got on my table beside me here, I've got 2 strips of tapes numbered with each fret. So as I cut it, I can place it on its number. And yeah, it's time to get hairy. Again, it's like every step of this is new and nerve-wracking for me. So I've done some tests on the pine one. I even grabbed a chunk of the original ebony and put a couple saw marks in it to see how they crunch in there. It seems to work, but again, I don't want to mess it up. It's looking like, it looks so nice. So without any more talking, I'm going to start cutting some fret wire. And the next step after that is going to be, again, sliding a little bit of super glue in there, lining my fret up, crunchy crunch, and hoping that we get 22 flawless frets. Let's go. So all I'm doing is grabbing my tang, kind of lining it up with the fret slot that's there. I'm leaving a tiny bit of overhang, like we're talking a mil. And I haven't figured out how I'm going to do this. Dan just kind of pinches it, but I'm nervous to short it and then, ruin a piece of wire because I only got 24. So I'm going to over it a little bit and then I don't think I can do it this way, can I? Let's find out. I'm going to send Fretwire everywhere, but at least if I do this, I know I'm getting it. I can see what I'm doing. I actually think I might like this method. I think it's going to be a little bit longer than I need it to be, but let's give it a whirl and see what happens. Maybe I should do this on a longer one first, so if I make a mistake, I can use it for a shorter one. Now we're thinking, Scotty. So same process though. I'm going to move this over here. I'm going to line my Fretwire up with the far side of that. This is the longest one I can get. There's a little bit of overhang. I'm going to use my flush cuts, and can you see it? Yeah, you might be able to see what I'm doing here. Maybe we'll zoom in on the video. I'm just actually making my flush cuts flush with the side of my neck and raising it up just enough to nip the wire. And yeah. I mean, there's definitely a sharp edge on one side. That's to be expected. It's definitely overhanging. And because I've never done this, I don't know how much overhang I should leave. So there's probably lots there. I'm going to call that 22 and put it over there on my tape. This works for me. It may not work for you. I'm not sure it's going to work for me the whole way through either. I might get halfway and find another way. But this is what we're going to do. And again, there's lots of resources on YouTube. I'm not claiming to be an expert. I'm just showing you what my process is. And, you know, if I find any tips along the way, I'll be sure to speak up. I'm going to stop talking now so I don't make any more mistakes. Well, I haven't made any, but presumptuous. There's no Control Z on this sucker, so let's get to work. Fretwire is cut. I mean, it's not that nerve-wracking to cut it, but this part might be a little bit more, you know, loosey-goosey or a little bit more scary because I don't want to get super glue everywhere. That's what the tape is hopefully for. I'm going to go grab a rag just in case so I can wipe some off in case it spills out a little too much. Again, I'm going to go hook up my little nozzle. Here's my super glue. I'm going to take the cap off and I'm going to put the nozzle on there. Sorry. I'm going to put these super fine cap nozzles on here so they will get right down into those fret slots. I mean, it is a little bit bigger. I'm hoping as it comes out, it wants to just, you know, like Venturi suck in there force. And then I'm going to throw this guy, my block, back under. I'm going to get rid of my extra frets. And then I'm just going to, one at a time, glue, press, you know, glue, press, and work my way down. And I'm not going to talk during this part because I don't want to mess it up because I'm not focused on what I'm doing. So let's get gluing. Alrighty, folks. As I said I would do, I finished gluing in those couple of problem frets. 1 and 16, I will not lie, weren't friendly. We didn't get along. What did I learn from this process? That 19 out of 21 went basically without an issue. Pretty level, pretty, you know, tangs tucked in, and then 2 cost me about 2 hours. I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't thrilled about that. But what did I actually learn? I learned that I did follow most of what Dan at Guns and Guitars was talking about as far as how I glued them in and used the fret call. And for the most part, it worked really well. Do I think that I could open up the fret slots a little bit? Probably, and I will adjust my file accordingly. I think the depth was good. I think having the little saw to just give a little bit extra because of my sanding issue probably helped. Now we get into the, you know, woodworking glue versus super glue conversation. Lots of people use wood, lots of people use super, and lots of people are happy. I'm sure if you asked each other what they felt, that, you know, maybe not so much, but super glue is a pain in the rump if you make a mistake. That's the takeaway for me from this, was the 2 that were issues. To pop them back out was it did some damage to the fretboard. I'm not going to lie, I don't know the extent yet, but I could see some of the ebony flaking up because the super glue had basically infiltrated it, and when you pulled it out, some of this fretboard came with it. So woodworker's glue would probably give you a little less tear out, but it would also give you ultimately a lot more working time. That's the key factor there, right? More working time with woodworking glue, less working time with super glue. Here we are. So again, another tool that you can probably, well, not probably, you can make yourself. It's just a fret bevel file. So we get in here, you can see, come on, find the angle, there we go. It's just a file. on a, I believe it's about a 35, 45 degree angle. And then there's a 90 on the back. And it's just inside this nice handy dandy block of wood that's already got a little hand grippy built in. So make it yourself. I actually priced it out. In order to go and buy a couple of files and then find a piece of wood and mill it all out was gonna run me, call it about 20 bucks. And this was about 20 bucks, you know, done. So laziness won out on this one, and convenience is king. I've said it a couple of times. Same thing with the, you know, the sanding radius block, this guy. You could, I probably will make these myself in the future, but because we're just trying to get the project done, one, I mean, if you're half decent at woodworking, you can see that you can make this yourself. It's not that big a deal. Same with this. Cost versus time, that's what you have to decide. And for me, time was the factor, not cost. So for, you know, 30 bucks to not have to spend, you know, an hour, 2 hours making it and getting it done, it was money well spent. So what we're doing now is we're just gonna file these down. We're gonna see if we can get some light in here, and you can see, yep, see the glinties that are happening there? Those are my frets that are overhanging, which to some degree, I don't want to say I did purposely, but I probably overkilled it because I've never done it and I didn't want to cut them short. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to level these off this way so that they're nice with the edge of my fretboard. And then we're going to dive into the actual leveling process. And I don't know, again, how much I'm going to talk about it because Dan does a really good job. He's got 2 or 3 tutorials that are fantastic and in-depth and much more knowledgeable than what I'm going to roll out at you. So, you know, I've got my tools here. I have gone along just preliminarily, and I've done my fret rocker. Listen. I don't know if you can pick that up on the mic, but there is a little ticky-ticky. That means that this guy, my fret rocker, is rocking on the middle fret. So I'm not going to lie, I'm not shocked by this, but, you know, we're going to get through it. So, off to leveling I go, and then we'll, oh, I guess, was this leveling or beveling? Call it what you want. Leveling is this too, so here we go. I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to get going. Alrighty, time to flip over. Again, just clearing off some of the tape. The tape just makes it skate a little bit more. You'll feel it as you're dragging it along that it doesn't kind of bite and do what it needs to do. It's kind of skating across the surface, so get rid of the tape. Doesn't look like I'm damaging the neck at all. I mean, everything appears to be good, so we're going to put the bevel on it now. Whoa, that was terrible. Yikes. Yep, that put a pretty big scuff across those two. Maybe I am going to do it with the way that makes it easier for me. Well, that sucks. Oh well, I still have to... Oh, is that 16? Oh, it's not 16. Either way, I think that's actually a high fret looking at it. Yeah, I can tell just from looking at it that that one's actually a little bit high. So, I mean, I got to go in and fix it anyway, so why not fix that too? Here we go. Alrighty. I say alrighty every time I start, don't I? Anywho, I've got them all ground down, pretty much flush. I couldn't do this before. Obviously I took the tape off because now you can see more of what's going on. I found as I was going that because that tape was on the side as a protective layer, it actually started interfering with being able to get them as flush as I want. And you wouldn't think, you know, a layer or two of tape would make a difference, but it really did because I was, you know, going along and doing my thing and it stopped working. And I kind of looked and I went, oh, the piece of tape is in the way. So, and again, you can even see where the tape kind of got ground down along here and not here. So tape spots that aren't going to be interfering with where the file's going to go. Again, it was protective for me. The guys who do this lots probably laugh and say, Scott, you don't really need to do that, but I've never done this. So I'm being a little bit, you know, anal protective, trying to keep it in good shape because it's been such a pain in the butt to make it look as nice as it is. So yeah, you know, those fret dots and the markers, I was trying to keep them protected. The fretboard itself, I know I'm gonna have to polish it out because there is some glue spill over from the frets going in. It is what it is. Cool. Now we're on to the next part, which is just going to be, I mean, you can go along and check with your fret rocker. Okay, Dan's got lots of information out there about that. The internet's got lots of information. I'm going to pick 16 just because you're going to hear it really obvious. Right, so that rocking back and forth, it's actually 15, that's the problem. I managed to get 16 to seat pretty nicely. 15 is not the issue, but it's glued in place and I'm not trying to pull it back out. So I accepted basically that some of them are going to get a little more filing down, a little more sanding down than I would like. But what were my options? Pull out a fret and mess with it for another 2 hours and potentially damage things more? Or accept that it's going to have a millimeter, not even. We're talking like, I don't know, what's like the tiniest measurement ever? A tiniest measurement ever, sand it off to make it level. I was willing to accept that. And if I'm being totally honest, after using this bevel file guy, I raked across a couple of times by accident. I don't know how I did it. I was being really careful, but it just jumped up, skated across, and it marred the crap out of a couple of my frets pretty good. So, I mean, not pretty good. Can we even see it in the light how much it did? Can we? I'm not even sure. Yeah, you can see it right on this one right here. It's got a little scratchy scratch on it. But again, we're going to sand it down, we're going to polish it, we're going to make it good. So that's what I'm on to next. I'm not even going to bother checking what needs to be leveled because I know it does. I'm going to use Dan's handy dandy tip of using a Sharpie. This happens to be blue. And I mean, I should have done this before I started, but I didn't. So I'm just going to give them all a wipe down just with my thumb, just to make sure any of the glue that might have been on there can kind of come off, because it does come off really easily if I'm being honest. So anything that my thumb is dragging on is probably, oh yeah, where I hit it with the file by accident, and you know, live and you learn. If anything, building this thing has really taught me to relax a little bit. It may not come across that way. I know it doesn't come across that way, but I'm way less, you know, not picky, just I'm appreciating what I am doing and the somewhat difficulty of it, and I'm willing to accept it's the first one I'm doing, and if I built 10 of these, I bet you the 10th one would be a whole lot better than the first one. So it's kind of like any woodworking, any project you do, the more you do it, the better you get. And for the first time, I'm forgiving myself, giving myself some margin of error, I guess. Anywho, throwing on some blue Sharpie. We're going to get that leveling beam out. I've got mine set up like Dan does, 240, 320, 400, and 600. So I'm not going to roll through everything. I'm going to bust it out. I don't really want to go to 240. I might start at 320 just to see what we get out of it, but I know there are a couple that are fairly wonky, so I'm going to leave these rolling. I'm going to go to town. I'm going to stop talking and focus on this. And on the other side, hopefully I've got nicely leveled frets, and we'll bounce on to the next step. Let's go. Oh, this makes me nervous. Yikes. I don't want to do it. I'm going to do it. Holy jumping. Yikes! Right off the bat, I can already tell I need to do something because this is going to drive me bonkers having the neck slide like that. So I'm going to come up with something heavy to put over there so it kind of bumps into it. I don't know what that's going to be, but I'm going to find out. But already, even in the wonky lighting, I can see that that top one that I knew was going to be high, that one was high. 16 is no longer an issue, but the fretboard's dummied. But because the way the file skipped across there, I've got a little bit of work to do, so 240 might be where it's at. And back to where we were. Ah, Scott. Sometimes I wonder about you. I really feel like two hands would give me better control, but oh, they already feel better. Cool. Well, I think I'm going to find a way that I can clamp something here so that I can actually swing this back and forth, because I just don't want to worry about pressure. And I feel like if I hold it like this, I can kind of support it better than one-handing it, so. Okie doke. Alrighty, take your pick. That's how I start. Finished using the bevel on these guys, getting them flush to the fretboard, and then putting the bevel on them. Turned out pretty good. I mean, if I'm being totally honest, I feel like I still want to tweak them a little bit, but one thing I did find is, much as I had that protective coating of tape on there to be protective, it also interfered with what I was doing, and you can see along the side a little bit where the tape started to peel up and started to actually get in the way of what I was trying to do. So I peeled all the tape off, and while I believe I said in the last one I thought I was doing a really good job of being protective of it, it actually is a royal pain in the butt. It gets kind of stuck in with some of the super glue. I haven't grabbed some steel wool, but I feel like I may grab some steel wool and try and clean that up. We're going to see. I still have to polish the frets. I'm kind of hoping that when I go in there with the buffer, it's going to get some of that out. But truth be told, I'm not sure it's going to work. So we are at a point now where we've got things pretty close to where they need to be for the frets being in place. Now we have to start obviously leveling the frets themselves. So we want to make sure that the neck is flat. Again, I'm just following along with kind of what Dan has talked about and some others have talked about. I went ahead and I've made myself my, oh, actually here, let's do it here. You'll see the little teethies in it. You can see the little notches in this ruler. Come on. So you can see there's some notches in there. It's just a fret ruler. It's to allow me to see how flat my fretboard actually is. And if I'm being totally honest, or it's not necessarily just how flat it is, but it's whether or not there's a front bow or a back bow to your neck. I knew there's a little bit of one going in, a little bit of a back bow, but shockingly, a little adjustment of my truss rod, and this thing flattened out pretty good. Like, I hate to say I'm surprised with the quality of my work, but I'm a little surprised it's gone as nicely as it did. So if you haven't done that step, make sure you do that. You can buy one of these. I think they're like 15 bucks on the old store on the interweb, or you can make one of yours out of a former T-square, which is all I did here. What did I use? I had a Dremel, and I actually had, you know, like one of those wood shaving carving bits, but it looks like a cylinder. That's what I used for this, and it gave me a very consistent little hump and Cookie Monster chomp out of it. So put it on there, check it out. If you've got a back bow, a little bit, not the end of the world from what I'm hearing, because then you shave out some of this and you leave some of this in place. If you have a front bow, that's not as good because you're shaving off this and you're leaving this, so there's more there. So get it as flat as you can, and then we're going to jump ahead. So truss rod adjustments, I am also not a master of. There's my quick rundown. Now we are going to hop over into the next section, which is leveling our frets a little bit. And if I'm being totally honest with you guys, I actually had started doing this step, and then I remembered I had to do that step, so I rewound. So the reason I knew that I forgot that step was because I took a couple of swipes of this, and I went, wait a minute, my sanding beam is rocking, and I went, oh no! So that's what I went and did, quickie adjustment, and I haven't tried it since. So now we're back to where I'm supposed to be. And all we're going to do is take our colored Sharpie, like we are advised to do by people who know more than us. I am using blue and not black, as some people have pointed out. It can just look like a reflection and you have a hard time seeing the color. So make sure you get all the way to the edges so that you can see what you're doing. Pretty simple, straightforward process. I'm trying desperately hard not to draw on my fretboard because, I mean, Sharpies are permanent and it's blue on ebony, so you'd probably see it. But where this fretboard is right now, I don't know if it's even worthwhile while trying to keep it in good shape. So here we go. I did unfortunately put a couple of scrapes in these frets when I was doing the beveling process because it just skated up on me. Like I wasn't being crazy and I was being careful, and the way that this guy came up, there's a couple times where I brought it across and it was zink, and I ended up putting some some driving lanes in there, but they should come out pretty easily. I have my sanding beam here. It's got 240, 320, 400, and 600 grits on it. I couldn't find self-sticky back adhesive, so I just used the old CA glue and painter's tape. I'm going to start with 320 because I feel like we're pretty good. I know there's a couple high. I know there's a couple that are maybe not low, but they're in the right spot, but some of the high ones are making them look low. So I'm just going to roll out with this. Again, not an expert on this one. Literally the first time I've ever done it, so it is 100% up in the air whether or not this is going to work out nicely, just like the installing frets portion. So you're seeing my journey. I'm hoping that it'll give you some confidence that, you know, you can turn out a pretty nice looking neck even if you have no idea what you're doing. I think the big thing, and I said it going in, is expect to make mistakes, and that rings crazy true for this. I was really hoping that this thing was going to be like, bam, when I was done, perfect. It's not going to be perfect. I mean, not even perfect, but like really nice. But there's a couple gouges because of the fret issue, and, you know, there's going to be some tape sticky goo, and have a good time with it. If this process has taught me anything, it's that you know, you're only as good as the number of times you've done something. And for a first time, I feel pretty good. So I've got a couple of blocks in place here because when I did the first round of this, I found that the neck shifting back and forth was driving me bananas. And again, I'm not putting any pressure down on this while I'm doing it. That's the right one, yep. But I don't want the neck to be sliding back and forth and messing me up. So we're done talking. I guess I forgot to mention this factor is that testing and checking, grab your fret rocker. This can be one you can buy online from all the major manufacturers, or you can make one yourself. Lots of information out there, but now that I've done a little bit of leveling, I just want to see if I'm still rocking. So you go across 3 at a time in different locations on the neck. I'm still going to mark some of the spots that I feel like are a little bit high. It's pretty good actually. Right there's a little bit high. So I'm going to give it another dose of Sharpie and take it down. Took my 320, marked my frets, did my fret rocker, if I'm being honest, 4 or 5 times. There are a couple that are a little more flat than I would like them to be, but we've got a tool that we're going to bust out in the next steps to try and fix that up. And hopefully it works to leave me with a nice crowned fret instead of, you know, a nice trapezoid that goes buzz every time I hit the note. So very quickly, this is all I did, back and forth, just seeing if there's any wobble. And you do it for every single one in kind of 3 different spots. It's a little tedious. This is literally all it is. It's just going back and forth and just rocking it. And if it rocks, then it means that this middle fret is high and the ones beside it are lower, which is why you have to keep on going every single fret. So I've done this a number of times and I'm feeling pretty confident. So I'm going to bump up to 400 back and forth, try and get out the gouges. The 320 shouldn't have left too many marks comparative to like a lower grit, but that's all I'm doing. 400, 600, 400 I'm going to go this way, 600 I'm going to go this way. We're just trying to polish out some of the marks left from the sandpaper, and then we are going to bump over into the next couple of steps. So no more talkie, time to sand. Make sure I'm using the right one. There's my 400. So just as a regurgitating parrot will do, I'm going to spit out what I've already heard. So we are going to create the fall off, and of course my tape's not going to rip nicely. Basically, fall off is going to allow for your string to vibrate the way it's supposed to vibrate without buzzing on these lower frets. So we're going to tape around the 9th. None of my information. This is all, you know, from online resources and other wonderful things. So I'm going to throw a little bit of tape. Wow. Apparently I'm used to ripping the skinnier stuff. So around my 9th fret, we're going to do this and cover up the fretboard in. I'm just going to tape it right onto the headstock just to keep it out of the way. And if you throw a couple of pieces right at the 9th, it basically creates that nice fall off that is desired. So we're going to do that right around 9. It's going to put the world's tiniest angle. But as we already discussed and found out that that piece of tape on the side can actually make a difference here, that piece of tape is just going to angle it a little bit and lose some of this lower fret, which, if I'm being totally honest, I lost a little more of these middle ones than I was expecting to when I was leveling. It probably is going to help me out to have this action a little bit lower. So I feel pretty confident and comfortable doing this, knowing that these ones are already lower than I want them to be. So if we give this a little extra help, probably not the end of the world. Again, I sound like I know what I'm talking about. I'm having a good time doing it. So a couple pieces of tape should create the fall off that I'm looking for. If I'm being honest, is that the new one? If I'm being honest, because I lie all the time. I'm going right to 320. I want this to, do I have enough of an angle here? Yep. I'm just going to go to town. Partially the other reason is, so these ones are a little bit lower than I'd like, 7, 9, 11, somewhere in there. But that 15 and 17 on either side of 16, because I managed to get 16 pretty flush. So it tells me that 17 and 15 were a little bit high. So this is only going to benefit them as well. Here we go. We're getting into the nitty gritty. So we've just added our fall off. Everything looks pretty decent. I'm going to take off my Gigantor hunk of tape. Oh yeah, I forgot I put that all the way around, didn't I? So we're going to get rid of this, and then we are going to get into... This is the part that I'm not going to lie, I am kind of not most eager to see, but I'm pretty eager to see what's going on here. And the reason is, because I'm a total noob at this, and probably I've got maybe my neck not set as nicely as I should, and I gimped on installing frets high and low. A couple of these frets are definitely pretty flat compared to what they should be. And by pretty flat, I mean extremely flat. So this little guy here, it's called the Fret Guru Dagger 2.0. We're gonna have to cut to a different view of it because my camera won't focus. Trust me, I'll throw the link down below. This is solely watching Dan's stuff as well as some other testimonials online that this sucker is supposed to be really fantastic. I'm not gonna lie, I jumped ahead and I actually did this bottom fret here. It was pretty flat. When I put my Sharpie across and then ran this guy back and forth, I was thoroughly convinced that this was going to leave tool marks in my fretboard. Shocking. It didn't leave any finger marks, or it didn't leave any file marks, which blows my mind because I've got an ebony fretboard. You should be able to see. You don't. Awesome. It's not cheap, but I have 7 guitars upstairs. I have never once done any fretwork on any of them, and this sucker makes me want to go and pull the strings off all of them. So it domed the fret very nicely. It left me just a little sliver of Sharpie, just like it's supposed to. I'm going to go across and around those corners, and quite honestly, that's what I'm going to do now is try and, I don't want to say salvage, it seems like a strong word, but I'm going to try and salvage what I got going on here before I go to that polishing step and hopefully, get the fretboard looking as pretty as it did before I gouged it all up. So you can stick around. You can watch me do this in super slow motion would mean it's like 9 hours. In super speed was what I was trying to say. And hopefully when I'm done this process, I will have nice domey frets instead of, pyramids with the top slopped off. I'll probably have more than just a little sliver of Sharpie left, which means maybe it's still a little, yeah, it's still a little flat. I can see that. The one beside it has a nice dome. So I'm going to keep going because, can we even actually see this? I don't know if we're going to be able to see this. This is going to be tricky. If you can see the second to last fret, it's more than a thin line of Sharpie. It's probably really hard to see in this lighting. Maybe there, yeah. So you can see it's a pretty clear line, and the one below it, there's almost no line. I know we're splitting hairs here, but if you look at it from a profile, you can see that it's still got a little bit of meat on it. So we're going to clean this guy out just to make sure. Metal filings are not our friend. Here we are, other side of the workshop, sort of. It's, 3 feet away. We are going to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone with this part of the process. I have got my fretboard sanded down to 800. There's lots of different information out there. Through my experimentation, which you can kind of see right here, the part up here near where my finger is not polished, that's just sanded, and then the nice shiny part is where it's been polished. So because I'm using ebony, oh yeah, there's a difference right there, right? So I'm using ebony. Works really nice. Again, I'm a little disappointed at some of the blowout where 1 in 16 went funky on me. First one. I was going to try and patch it up. It's not going to affect the playability. It's an aesthetic thing, and I want to keep this process moving, so I'm not going to bother with it. I've just got this all nicely sanded down. I managed to get all of the, tapey, gooey grossness. The next process is going to be polishing my frets, which kind of doubles up with polishing the ebony at the same time. So I have these little guys here. They're just little wool pad marshmallows. They go on the end of my Dremel. We grab some polishing compound, this stuff. You literally just turn your Dremel on low speed, go load some on there, and go across the frets. I did a couple tests, and my frets went from looking pretty, not scratchy, but dull, to very shiny and bright. So I don't think there's anything else crazy about my process. That's what I'm using. I'm going to probably need about 1,000 of these guys, I'm guessing, but, here it is. I'm going to give my frets a wipe down, which is wipe down with just a clean rag before I start, just to try and get any of the extra goo off there, because you can see on this guy where I did my testing, all the black stuff on there is the stuff that was on my fret. So, you know, you want to get rid of kind of as much of that as you can. And we're going to go to town, and when we're done, I will show you the results, and I'm hoping that it looks fantastic. Oh, I forgot to mention, and I mean, it's up to you what you're doing with it. I've seen a lot of people using Scotch-Brite and steel wool. I noticed when I was leveling my frets and everything that steel wool actually helps bring out some of the flaws in it. It does, I don't want to say it dings up your fretboard because it doesn't, but it definitely scours it super lightly. It's like the steel wool I'm using is like quadruple zero, so it's really fine stuff. It's to the equivalent of like 400 or 600 sandpaper. But what I noticed is that when I went over the frets with my steel wool, it helped bring out some of the dings. Like I still have a little tiny ding there and a little tiny ding there. I should get them out because technically speaking, it's going to affect the way the guitar plays. I'm going to hope the polish will help me with that. But yeah, steel wool can be your friend. A lot of people don't like it because it can rust in the wood and stuff and little fibers, but I found it was helpful for that process. So anywho, so I'm actually going to throw a new one on. I know I can still use this one. It's still relatively new, but yeah, pretty simple. We grab our little our marshmallow. Mine just thread on to the end of this guy. Here's my block O stuff. Again, I've got this on low settings, just like Dan's talking about, as low as it'll go, because you don't want to unseat your fret by accident. So, by this point I might have lost a whole bunch of people who are going, Scott, you are a total fool. That is not what you should have done. And to those people, I sincerely apologize, because if I'm being totally honest with everybody, I kind of hoped that my result was going to be this guy, you know, where I just polished it with the marshmallow and then I could go over with my frets, but it didn't work out that way. And instead of standing here and stewing over it for like 2.5 hours and trying to figure out how I can sand the fretboard down for like a 15th time, which I did not want to do, I'm saying forget it. I'm going to call it what it is. I am well aware that I probably shouldn't have put a compound on here. Maybe I'm wrong. Inexperience 101 right here, and I am willing to chalk this up to a learning experience. So that's where I'm rolling with this. I'm going to go through, I'm going to finish doing these frets and buffing them up with the compound, even though I'm probably not supposed to. I may go back over once I get some more marshmallows and do another pass after I've cleaned it up, just to try and get any of the oily, because again, I'm not dumb. I know that there is some stuff in here, and this is already an oily wood, so am I nervous that when I go to play this that, you know, there's going to be some goo that comes up on my strings that gets, you know, kind of like scraped? Yes, I 100% am. And if that happens, then I'm probably going to curse a whole bunch and cry and curse and cry and repeat process for about an hour. But here we are. So instead of just sitting here and doing nothing, I'm doing this. And if it's wrong, I'll own it. And I'm 100% owning that it might be wrong. And if it's not and it plays great, then everybody's going to say, I'm glad you didn't cry and cuss in the corner. So this is how I'm going to finish it off. I'm going to use a couple rags, make sure I'm using clean sides all the time to buff up everything. My frets are looking nice and shiny now, which is kind of the other reason I rolled ahead with this was, you know what? My frets can just get... Did it stop recording? No. That's that. I'm going to finish this off. I'm going to go buff it up. And when it's gonna, I mean, it's gonna look great. Like I can already tell you, the ebony looks really nice. It's just whether or not I'm gonna have some oily, greasy residue coming up on my strings afterwards. So we're gonna buff it. We're gonna finish, and fingers crossed that my guess was a correct one. So here we are at the end of the pain in the neck journey that this has been. No, all jokes aside, it has been a really good learning experience. Some things I'm really pleased with, some things I'm not so pleased with. You know, my marker dots got a little bit funky there, and they're not quite as bright white as I'd like, but I just got to a point with it where I said, I can keep messing with this forever, or I can finish it off and say, for my first one, it's good enough. And sometimes good enough is better than... Sorry, sometimes done is better than perfection or good enough. You know what I'm trying to say. Either way, it looks pretty good. Things are shiny that are supposed to be shiny. I don't know. I think it looks pretty cool. I gave the neck after I finished doing all the buffing of the frets and the fretboard, I went over the whole neck again, well, not the fretboard, but like the actual neck part of things, with 400 again, just to kind of get out some of the, there was a little bit of greasy grime, you know, there was a little bit of grease and grime on it from, you know, filing down some of the shavings they get on your hands. I've been washing my hands a ton trying to keep the greasy, gunky stuff. The compound that I used to polish the frets, again, same thing. It just got a little bit, you know, not so pristine looking, so I gave her a little sand down. I originally thought I made not a mistake, but I thought I was jumping the gun. I was going to tell you guys, hey, I'm going to finish it first and then we're going to install the tuner keys, but I came up with a bit of a fluke happily, is where the tuner keys are going to go on the back of the neck here, on the back of the head. Where's my lighting? There's my lighting. I started dropping them in saying, you know, I'm going to pre-drill them, and then I went, wait a second, how do I make sure that they're all lined up? Well, I mean, it's fairly straightforward. I grabbed a little baby square. I measured down 2 centimeters from the very top of here, and from the top of here, I connected the lines, and when I put my tuner keys in, I'm going to put the bottom point touching that line, and to make sure everything staggers nicely and lines up, parallel to the headstock. I don't want them to be all funny. So, that's that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to have to draw some, you can draw marker holes, or you can just drill with your tuner key right in there. Is there an advantage? I mean, if you do it with the tuner key in there, you can see what you're dealing with, and you can see where it's going to go. And if it's wrong, the disadvantage is if you hit it with your drill bit or something, you're dinging it up, which, how much do you care? I don't know. I think at this point, I'm good with just marking them and drilling them out. So I'm just going to try and get out of the light so you can see what I'm doing. I'm not sure how much that's working. I'm going to make sure that that front corner is touching. I'm going to pinch my thumb on it, and I'm going to draw a dot. And I'm going to, oh, there was paint in the hole. I'm going to do it again because there was paint in the hole and I can't see the mark I made. So I'm going to line up my dot and line up my corner. I'm going to hold it on the back and I'm going to draw my circle. There you go. So can you see this tiny little bitty circle? You'll have to take my word for it. There's a tiny little circle there. I'm going to wash, rinse, and repeat this cycle. I'm going to use a, look at the size of this little guy. Tiny little drill bit. And I actually didn't even have, my chuck wouldn't close small enough on my drill, so I had to use a countersink, so I'm going to have to be careful that I don't gouge anything. And then, yeah, so I'm going to mark them, I'm going to drill them, and then I'm going to assemble them. So I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to do it. Louis, I lied. I said I wasn't going to take footage of me screwing this guy down and doing all this install, but I changed my mind because the neck has got the stuff covered on it and it's just kind of chilling, so I can. So I may as well take footage of it, and then if we use it, we use it, and if we don't, then we don't. But at least we have it if we want to. Oh, that looks badass! What? I think I'm more shocked that I haven't lost any of the parts throughout this whole process. They've been around my shop so many times. Oh, look how cool this looks. What? Come on now. Good choice of wood, Scott. This is cool looking. I guess I could have lowered them a little bit, but it's a little too late now. All right, well, there we go. Ta-da! Look at this bad mama. Cool. Look at that. First guitar neck, 99% complete. Woo! I'm gonna try really hard to look at you, not you. Dude, if I'm recording, can you be talking? Oh, yeah. Child playing Wii upstairs, Louis. Super helpful while recording. I'm not even gonna give parts to this. There's too much. You, not you, because I was looking at you a whole bunch yesterday. Oh, why do I record on Friday? Friday I'm always mumble mouth. Relaxed. Maybe it'll come across. All right, I'm gonna hold. I'm starting it over, Louis. I don't like it. Cut. No, we're gonna talk about that now.